What's up everyone, welcome back. If you're new here and enjoyed today's video, smash that subscribe button. We're on an epic journey to 10k subscribers and would love to have you join our amazing community. And hey, dropping a comment or leaving a like really helps YouTube share our content with more awesome people like you. I've got something special planned for today, so let's dive right in. Dr. Maya Patel had spent 15 years searching the stars for signs of intelligent life, but she never expected to find it during her midnight shift at the Allen Telescope Array. The first anomaly appeared at 11:42 p.m. on a cold October night, a pattern so subtle that she almost dismissed it as interference. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted her thick-rimmed glasses, dark eyes fixed on the logarithmic spirals dancing across her monitor. The signal pulsed with mathematical precision, each wave exactly 1.618 seconds apart, the golden ratio. No natural phenomenon could produce such perfection. "Dr. Reynolds," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this." Her colleague shuffled over, coffee mug in hand, his usual skepticism evident in his weathered face. But as he leaned in to study the readout, the mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the polished concrete floor. Neither of them moved to clean it up. "Run it through the verification protocols," he ordered, though they both knew this was beyond anything their protocols were designed to handle. The pattern began shifting, evolving in complexity. Numbers emerged within the signal, prime numbers, then Fibonacci sequences, then something far more intricate. Within hours, similar reports flooded in from radio telescopes across the globe. The signal was everywhere, growing stronger with each passing minute. By dawn, every screen on Earth, from smartphones to billboards, flickered with the same sequential patterns. The global internet slowed to a crawl as millions shared videos and theories. News anchors struggled to maintain composure as they reported on the unprecedented phenomenon. Dr. Patel hadn't left her post for 18 hours when it happened. The sky itself seemed to tear open. They emerged from the cosmic breach like crystalline cathedrals, each structure larger than any human construction in history. 7 of them, arranged in a perfect heptagon around the Earth, their surfaces refracting sunlight in impossible ways. The global panic that followed was immediate and devastating. Stock markets crashed within minutes. Religious leaders called for emergency services. Military installations worldwide went into full alert. But it was the message that truly changed everything. It came simultaneously through every speaker, every headphone, every radio, and every television on the planet. The same words translated perfectly into every known language. "We have returned to evaluate our creation." The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It resonated with a clarity that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to the mind. In that moment, as Dr. Patel stood with her colleagues, watching the massive structures through the observatory's telescope, she understood that humanity had been living in a cradle, and our parents had finally returned to check on their children. She didn't yet know that these beings would offer humanity a choice so terrible it would shake the very foundation of what it meant to be human. She couldn't have known that within 7 days she would hold the fate of our species in her hands. All she knew as she stared up at those impossible structures gleaming against the darkening sky was that everything humanity thought we knew about our origins, our purpose, and our place in the universe was about to change forever. The founders had returned, and they were not what anyone expected. The holographic projection appeared simultaneously in every major city across the globe at exactly 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 48 hours after the crystalline structures arrived. Dr. Maya Patel stood in Times Square among thousands of others, their faces illuminated by the colossal figure hovering above them. The being appeared both crystalline and organic, its form shifting between states like liquid glass. When it spoke, its words manifested as ripples of light through its transparent body. "We are the Founders," it announced, its voice resonating through the bones of every human on Earth. "Before your sun burned bright, before your planet cooled, we seeded the primordial waters of Earth with the building blocks of life. You are our greatest experiment, but also our greatest concern." The crowd around Dr. Patel stood silent, many weeping, others filming with shaking hands. A child pointed at the figure and whispered, "Are they angels, Mummy?" The answer came moments later, and it was far from divine. "Your species was designed to evolve along a specific path," the being continued. "Your consciousness was meant to develop in harmony with the cosmic frequencies we embedded in your original genetic code. But something has deviated. Something has gone wrong." Dr. Patel's phone buzzed. A message from the United Nations. Her presence was requested immediately. She wasn't surprised. As one of the first to detect the Founder's signal, she had been fielding calls from government agencies for the past 2 days. What did surprise her was the list of other names in the message. 11 other scientists and researchers from around the world, each selected to represent humanity in what would become the most important diplomatic mission in history. The UN building was chaos when she arrived. Security personnel rushed through corridors, diplomats argued in multiple languages, and military officials huddled over maps and satellite data. In the main assembly hall, Secretary General Chen stood before the gathered representatives, his usual composure strained. "The Founders have requested 12 human representatives to board their vessels," he announced. "They have chosen these individuals themselves based on criteria we don't yet understand." Dr. Patel looked around at her fellow selectees. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, the quantum physicist whose theories on consciousness had revolutionized modern physics. Dr. Amanda Foster, the pioneering geneticist. 9 others, each brilliant in their field, each looking as terrified as she felt. The transport to the nearest crystalline structure was scheduled for midnight. As they boarded the specialized aircraft, Dr. Patel clutched her tablet containing humanity's most pressing questions. But when they finally entered the structure through a membrane that felt like walking through warm water, those questions seemed suddenly inadequate. The interior defied physics, spaces folded into themselves, corridors stretched infinitely before shrinking to single points. Their founder guide, a smaller version of the holographic, being led them through geometries that made their minds ache. "Your species has developed remarkable intelligence," it said, its voice now more intimate but no less alien. "But intelligence was never the primary goal of your design. What we sought to create was something far more valuable, a specific form of consciousness that could serve as a bridge between dimensional planes." The Revelation Chamber, as the Founders called it, was a vast sphere of shifting crystal. As they entered, images began to appear around them, the entire history of life on Earth, from the first single-celled organisms to modern humans. But it wasn't just a documentary. They could feel every mutation, every evolutionary leap, every moment of emergence. "We have guided countless species across the cosmos," the Founder explained, each designed to achieve a specific form of conscious evolution. "But humanity..." It paused, its form rippling with what might have been concern. "Humanity has developed in unexpected ways." Dr. Tanaka stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overtaking his fear. "Are you saying we're a failed experiment?" The Founder's response sent chills through every human present. "Not failed. Something far more complicated. You have evolved beyond your parameters, and now we must decide what to do about that." The images around them shifted to show other worlds, other species, some horrifyingly alien, others disturbingly similar to humans. All of them, they would soon learn, had faced the same moment of judgment humanity now confronted. As Dr. Patel Watch these revelations unfold. A terrible realization began to form in her mind. The founders hadn't just returned to check on their experiment. They had returned to pass sentence, and the choices they would offer humanity would test not just our unity, but the very essence of what it meant to be human. The revelation chamber transformed around them, its crystalline walls becoming transparent to reveal Earth floating below, a blue marble suspended in the void. Dr. Maya Patel felt her stomach lurch, not from the view, but from what the founder was about to tell them. "Your species stands at a crossroads," the being announced, its form fragmenting into thousands of shimmering pieces before reconstituting. "We offer you two paths forward. Both are necessary. Both are irreversible. The choice must be unanimous among all living humans." Dr. Amanda Foster clutched her notepad so hard her knuckles went white. "What do you mean by unanimous?" The founder's response came with a ripple of what might have been amusement or pity. Every conscious human being must agree, from the eldest to the youngest capable of understanding. This is not a decision for governments or representatives. This is a choice for your entire species. Dr. Patel felt her throat tighten. "And these choices are..." The chamber darkened, and two distinct visions manifested before them. The first showed human beings transformed, their eyes containing galaxies, their movements fluid like liquid mercury, their consciousness visibly connected through threads of light. "Option 1, correction," the founder explained. "We will modify your species to align with the original design parameters. Your consciousness will be adjusted to resonate with the cosmic frequencies as intended. You will become what you were meant to be." "And what exactly were we meant to be?" Dr. Tanaka demanded, his scientific skepticism evident. "Conduits," the founder replied. "Bridges between physical reality and the higher dimensions. Your current form of consciousness is primitive, limited, trapped in material concerns." The second vision appeared, showing Earth empty of human life, but filled with strange, ethereal structures that pulsed with otherworldly energy. "Option 2, harvest. We will extract the consciousness of every human being, preserving your memories and experiences in our eternal data arrays. Your physical forms will cease, but your essence will contribute to the greater understanding of consciousness evolution across the cosmos." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Patel felt her mind reeling, trying to process the magnitude of what they were being asked to decide. "How long do we have to make this choice?" she finally managed to ask. 7 rotations of your planet," the founder stated. "What you call days." Dr. Foster stepped forward, her voice shaking. "And if we refuse both options?" The founder's form darkened, becoming almost opaque. "That is not an option. The experiment must be concluded. Your species' unauthorized evolutionary path poses risks beyond your comprehension." "Risks to whom?" Dr. Tanaka challenged. The founder's response was chilling in its simplicity. "To everything." As the 12 representatives were transported back to Earth, each carrying the weight of this impossible choice, Dr. Patel noticed something in the data streaming across her tablet. A slight discrepancy in the founder's energy signatures. Something about their explanation didn't add up, but she couldn't quite grasp what it was. Within hours, the choice was broadcast globally. Humanity had 7 days to decide its fate, and every single human being had to agree on the same option. The response was immediate and chaotic. Religious leaders claimed the founders were gods or demons. Scientists argued over the implications of both choices. Social media exploded with debates, theories, and desperate pleas. But as Dr. Patel sat in her temporary office at the UN, reviewing the data from the crystalline structure, she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't being told everything. The choice seemed designed to be impossible, requiring complete unanimity, from a species that had never agreed on anything in its entire history. As the first protests erupted in major cities worldwide, as the first doomsday cults emerged proclaiming salvation through correction, as the first suicide notes appeared from those choosing their own third option, Dr. Patel began to understand something terrible. This wasn't just a choice between two dooms. It was a test, and humanity was failing it spectacularly. Day 3 since the choice was announced, and civilization was beginning to fracture along new, terrifying lines. Dr. Maya Patel stood at her office window in the UN Temporary Command Center, watching the streets of New York below. The pro-correction movement had gathered in Times Square, their members easily identifiable by the silver circlets they wore around their heads, a symbol of their willingness to be upgraded by the founders. "They're calling themselves the Ascendant now," Dr. Tanaka said, walking up beside her. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. None of them had. They've gathered over 10 million followers worldwide in just 48 hours. On the screens behind them, news feeds showed the global deterioration. In Rome, the Vatican had declared an emergency conclave to determine the Catholic Church's official position. In Mecca, millions of pilgrims had gathered, seeking guidance from religious leaders. The Chinese government had already announced its support for correction, while several European nations were leaning toward harvest, arguing it was a form of digital immortality. "Any progress with the data anomalies?" Patel asked, turning away from the window. Tanaka shook his head. "Every time we think we've isolated the inconsistency in the founders' energy signatures, it shifts. It's like they're deliberately obscuring something." A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Dr. Foster burst in, her tablet displaying new information. "You need to see this. I found something in the archived records they gave us." The 3 scientists huddled around the tablet. Foster had discovered references to other civilizations the founders had corrected, but the data was fragmentary, corrupted. "Look at these patterns," Foster pointed to a series of equations. "The neural modifications they're proposing for correction, they're not about evolution or advancement. They're about control." Patel felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "These other species, after correction, they all showed the same pattern of development. Exact same pattern, down to the decimal point. That's not evolution, that's programming." Outside, the chants of the Ascendant grew louder. They had begun positioning themselves as humanity's salvation, promising a future free from conflict, poverty, and suffering. Their leader, a former tech billionaire named James Monroe, had already amassed a following that rivaled major religions. But they weren't the only faction gaining power. The Preservers, as they called themselves, had formed in opposition to both choices. They advocated for resistance, arguing that humanity should fight back against the founders. Their numbers were smaller, but their actions were becoming increasingly desperate. Dr. Patel's phone buzzed. Another report of violence. A group of Preservers had attacked an Ascendant gathering in Berlin. 17 dead, dozens injured. "It's happening faster than we predicted," Tanaka muttered, reviewing similar reports from around the world. "Societies breaking down along ideological lines we never imagined possible." Dr. Foster pulled up another screen of data. "Look at these atmospheric readings. Since the founders arrived, there's been a subtle increase in certain electromagnetic frequencies. It's affecting brainwave patterns globally." "They're manipulating us," Patel realized, "creating the perfect conditions for conflict and chaos." "But why?" Tanaka asked, "if they have the power to simply take what they want?" "Because they need our consent," Foster interrupted. "Whatever they're really after, they need humanity to choose it willingly." A notification flashed across their screens, another transmission from the founders. This one contained detailed information about previous civilizations they had harvested. The data was overwhelming, showing species after species that had chosen this path. But as Dr. Patel began analysing the information, she noticed something that made her heart stop. In every single case, the choice had been unanimous. Every single time. "That's statistically impossible," she whispered. "No species, no matter how unified, could achieve perfect consensus on a choice this significant, unless the choice itself is an illusion." Tanaka finished her thought. Before they could discuss this further, alarms began blaring throughout the building. On the streets below, the ascendant crowd had begun marching toward the UN complex, but something was wrong with them. Their movements were too synchronized, their chanting too perfect. As Dr. Patel watched in horror, their eyes began to glow with the same crystalline light as the founders. The experiment had entered its next phase, and humanity's time was running out. The secure laboratory deep beneath the UN complex hummed with equipment hastily assembled from research centers worldwide. Dr. Patel and Dr. Tanaka had been working for 18 hours straight, analyzing the quantum signature patterns emitted by the founders' crystalline structures. "There," Tanaka said, pointing to a fluctuation in the data stream. "Do you see it? Every 3.7 seconds, there's a micropulse that doesn't match their primary communication frequency." Dr. Patel leaned in, her exhausted eyes struggling to focus on the holographic display. The pattern was subtle, almost undetectable, unless you knew exactly what to look for, but it was there, a secondary signal hidden beneath the founder's main transmission. "It's like they're talking to someone else," she muttered, reaching for her 5th cup of coffee. "Or something else." The door burst open and Dr. Foster rushed in, her face pale. "I've decoded another segment of their historical database. You need to see this immediately." She pulled up a series of images on the main screen, archaeological records from other worlds. Each showed the same pattern, crystalline structures identical to those now orbiting Earth, followed by complete planetary transformation. "Look at the dates," Foster said, her voice trembling. "These aren't sequential experiments. They're happening simultaneously across multiple galaxies." Tanaka's eyes widened. "A harvest on a cosmic scale." "But that's not the worst part," Foster continued, pulling up another dataset. "I found references to something they call the network. As far as I can tell, it's some kind of vast consciousness repository. But look at the energy readings." Dr. Patel felt her blood run cold as she studied the numbers. "These can't be right. The energy output is enough to power multiple universes," Tanaka finished. "They're not storing consciousness. They're feeding on it." The revelation hit them all at once. The founders weren't scientists conducting experiments. They were farmers tending to their crops, and humanity's consciousness was meant to be their feast. "Both choices lead to the same outcome," Patel whispered, "whether they correct us or harvest us. We end up as fuel," Foster concluded. A sudden tremor shook the building. Above them, they could hear the sounds of chaos. The Ascendant followers had breached the UN's outer security perimeter. Tanaka pulled up live security footage. The scene was nightmarish. The Ascendants moved in perfect synchronization, their silver circlets now glowing with an inner light. But it was their eyes that caused Patel to gasp. They were completely crystalline, reflecting the same impossible geometries as the founders' vessels. "They're already being converted," Foster said. "The circlets, they're not just symbols, they're transmission devices." Dr. Patel turned to another screen showing global data feeds. Similar transformations were happening wherever large groups of ascendants gathered. Their consciousness was being networked, synchronized, prepared. "But why give us a choice at all?" Tanaka wondered aloud. "Why not just take what they want?" The answer came to Dr. Patel in a flash of horrifying clarity. She rushed to her quantum analysis station, pulling up the deep space scans from the night the founders first appeared. "Look at the background radiation patterns," she said, fingers flying over the controls. "The crystalline structures, They're not ships, they're prisons. The others gathered around her station as she explained. The founders aren't the gardeners, they're escaped prisoners. The choice, the 7-day deadline, the requirement for unanimity. It's all part of a protocol they're forced to follow. A protocol set by whom? Foster asked. Before Patel could answer, every screen in the laboratory suddenly flickered. The secondary signal they detected earlier surged, becoming visible across all frequencies. In that moment, they saw something behind the Founder's transmission. A vast network of living light, spanning galaxies. And it was watching them. We're not their experiment, Patel realized, her voice barely a whisper. We're their attempt at escape. They need our consciousness, our collective power, to break free from something far more ancient than themselves. Another tremor shook the building, stronger this time. Above them, they could hear the ascendants getting closer, their synchronized chanting growing louder. How long until they reach us? Foster asked. Tanaka checked the security feeds. Minutes, maybe less. Dr. Patel grabbed her tablet, downloading everything they'd discovered. We need to get this information to the preservers. There has to be a way to fight back. As they prepared to escape through the laboratory's emergency tunnels, a final piece of data caught her eye. A fragment of code hidden deep in the Founder's transmission pattern. It wasn't just a signal, it was a key. And somehow deep in her rapidly evolving consciousness, Dr. Maya Patel knew that humanity's survival would depend on learning how to use it. The abandoned subway tunnel echoed with the sound of dripping water and distant rumblings from the chaos above. Dr. Patel and her colleagues had been moving through New York's underground network for hours, guided by members of the preservation movement who had anticipated the need for such escape routes. The preservers have safe houses set up throughout the city, their guide, a former subway engineer named Marcus, explained as they navigated the darkness. We've been preparing since day one, though we never imagined it would get this bad this quickly. Dr. Patel clutched her tablet containing their discoveries, the device powered down to avoid detection. The Founder's technology could track active electronics, something they'd learned when the Ascendants had begun hunting down Resistance members through their digital footprints. They emerged in an old power station converted into a makeshift command center. Dozens of people worked at jury-rigged computers running on isolated networks, careful to stay off the main grid. On makeshift walls, maps showed the spread of the Ascendants' influence. Nearly 30% of the global population had already joined their ranks. Dr. Patel, a familiar voice called out. She turned to see Dr. Richard Chen, a neurobiologist she'd worked with years ago. His left arm was in a sling, and a fresh scar ran down his face. The Ascendants, he explained, noting her concerned look. They're not just converting people ideologically anymore. They're using force. Dr. Tanaka connected their secure tablet to the Resistance's isolated network, beginning the data transfer. We've uncovered something about the Founder's true nature, he announced to the gathered scientists and Resistance leaders. They're not what they claim to be. As they shared their discoveries about the prison ships and the greater cosmic entity that seemed to be containing the Founders, the room fell silent. The implications were staggering. So we're caught in the middle of a war between cosmic entities? Marcus asked, his voice heavy with disbelief. More like a prison break, Dr. Foster corrected. And we're being used as the lockpicks. Dr. Patel pulled up the mysterious code fragment they'd discovered. This might be our key to fighting back. It's embedded in their transmission pattern, like a flaw in their programming. Or a safeguard put there by whatever imprisoned them, Dr. Chen suggested. The ground above them trembled. The Ascendants had been conducting sweeps of the city, their synchronized movement, creating seismic patterns that the Preserver's sensors could detect. They're getting closer to finding our frequency isolation technique, a communications expert reported. The Founders are upgrading them faster than we anticipated. And Dr. Patel watched the pattern of their movement on the sensors. Something about it seemed familiar. "Play that seismic pattern again," she requested. As they watched the wavelength display, Dr. Tanaka gasped. "It matches the secondary signal we detected. The Ascendants aren't just being controlled by the Founders. They're being used as amplifiers," Patel finished. "Each converted human adds to their broadcast strength. They're building towards something." A sudden burst of static filled the room, and every piece of equipment briefly flickered. Dr. Foster rushed to her analysis station. That energy surge, it carried data. Encrypted, but definitely not from the Founders. As they worked to decode it, Dr. Patel felt a strange sensation in her mind, like a whisper in an unknown language. Looking around, she saw others touching their temples, experiencing the same phenomenon. "It's the other entity," she realized, "the one that imprisoned the Founders. It's trying to communicate directly with our consciousness." Dr. Chen's equipment began picking up unusual brainwave patterns from everyone in the room. "Our neural activity is synchronizing, but not like the Ascendants. This is different, more organic." Before they could process this development, the perimeter alarms blared. On the security feeds, they watched in horror as a massive group of Ascendants moved through the streets, above in perfect formation, their crystalline eyes scanning methodically. But what terrified Dr. Patel most wasn't their presence. It was what she saw happening to their physical forms. Their bodies were beginning to transform, becoming partially crystalline themselves. The conversion wasn't just mental, it was physical. "They're evolving them," Dr. Foster whispered, "or devolving them into something that can survive whatever they're building toward." The mysterious code fragment on Patel's tablet pulsed with new data, responding to the neural synchronization in the room. As she studied it, understanding began to dawn, terrible and wonderful at once. "We've been thinking about this wrong," she announced, a voice strong despite her fear. "The choice they offered humanity. It wasn't just about choosing between two forms of consumption. It was about proving we could unify our consciousness without losing our individuality. And if we can do that," Dr. Tanaka began, "then we might be able to resist both the Founders and whatever imprisoned them," she finished. "We might be able to choose our own path." But as another tremor shook the room, as the Ascendants drew closer to their hidden sanctuary, as more mysterious signals pulsed through their minds, Dr. Patel wondered if they would have time to implement what they'd discovered. The Founders' deadline was approaching, and humanity's window for survival was closing fast. The Resistance bunker's makeshift laboratory hummed with activity as Dr. Patel and her team raced against time. They had been analyzing the combined data from their neural synchronization event, the mysterious code fragment, and the Founders' original evolutionary templates for humanity. Something was emerging, a pattern so profound it threatened to shatter everything they thought they knew. "Look at this," Dr. Tanaka called out, his hands moving through the holographic display of human consciousness evolution. "Our deviation from their original design. It wasn't random." Dr. Patel joined him, watching as centuries of human neural development played out before them. The pattern was subtle at first, tiny variations in consciousness development that the Founders had labelled as errors, but when viewed as a whole, "It's perfect," she breathed. "We didn't deviate from their plan. We transcended it." Dr. Foster rushed over with new data from their global sensor network. "The Ascendant's transformation, it's triggering something in the unaffected population. Look at these brainwave patterns." The displays showed rippling waves of neural activity spreading across the globe. Even as the Ascendants grew in number, those who resisted were experiencing their own evolution, subtle but profound changes in consciousness. "The Founders didn't make a mistake," Dr. Chen said, understanding dawning on his face. "They made something better than they intended, something they couldn't control." Dr. Patel pulled up the ancient records they decoded. "Look at these other civilizations. the ones they claim to have harvested or corrected. The data's been altered. They didn't fail to evolve as intended. They evolved exactly as we did, Tanaka finished, and the founders destroyed them for it. A deeper analysis of the prison ship's structure revealed something even more startling. The crystalline material wasn't just a building medium. It was a containment system for consciousness itself. The ships aren't just prisons, Dr. Patel realized. They're fragments of the consciousness of whatever entity imprisoned the founders. They're alive. Marcus, who had been quietly monitoring their perimeter defenses, spoke up. "Are you saying the ships are on our side?" "Not exactly," Foster replied, studying the energy signatures. "They're neutral containers designed to hold the founders. But the containment is weakening. That's why they need us. Human consciousness has evolved to a point where it could be used to break their prison." Dr. Patel's tablet suddenly lit up with new data, information streaming from the mysterious code fragment. As she decoded it, her hands began to shake. "There's something else," she said. "Other civilizations that succeeded, that rejected both choices. They're out there, hidden, evolved beyond what the founders could comprehend." "How many?" Tanaka asked. "Thousands, maybe more. All of them achieved the same thing, unified consciousness, without sacrificing individuality. They're connected through some kind of network we can barely detect." The ground above them shook violently. The ascendants were getting closer, their synchronized movements, creating seismic patterns that threatened to collapse the tunnel system. But Dr. Patel barely noticed. She was focused on a revelation so massive it threatened to overwhelm her. "The founders aren't trapped in these ships because they're prisoners," she said. "They're trapped because they're food." The room fell silent as she continued. "The entity that imprisoned them, it's not their jailer, it's their natural predator. And it's been cultivating civilizations like ours as antibodies against them." Dr. Foster's equipment suddenly registered massive energy spikes from the crystalline ships. Something's changing up there. The prison ships, they're resonating with human consciousness frequencies. On their monitors, they watched as the ascendants throughout the city suddenly stopped moving. Their crystalline eyes flickered, as if experiencing interference. "The ships," Tanaka whispered. "They're recognizing our evolved consciousness pattern. They're trying to help us." Dr. Patel pulled up the mysterious code fragment one more time. In the context of their new understanding, its purpose became clear. "This isn't just a key," she said. "It's an activation sequence. The ships aren't just prisons. They're incubators. And humanity isn't just another experiment." She looked at her colleagues, her eyes bright with understanding. "We're the latest generation of cosmic antibodies, and we've just reached maturity." But as hope began to rise in the room, a new transmission cut through their systems. The founder's message was brief but terrifying. "Protocol violation detected, emergency harvest initiated, timeline accelerated." They had just run out of time, and the real battle for humanity's soul was about to begin. "Emergency harvest means they're abandoning their own protocols," Dr. Patel explained, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "They're going to try to take everyone at once, ascendants and resistors alike." The resistance bunker had become a frenzied hub of activity. Teams of scientists and engineers worked to modify communication equipment based on their new understanding of the prison ship's technology. Dr. Tanaka rushed in from the monitoring station. "We're picking up massive energy buildups in all 7 crystalline structures. They're positioning themselves into some kind of amplification array." "How long?" Patel asked, not looking up from her work. "Hours at most, maybe less." Dr. Foster emerged from her makeshift genetics lab, carrying a device that hummed with another worldly frequency. "The neural transmitter is ready, but it's untested. We have no idea what broadcasting a unified consciousness signal will do to the human mind." "We know what not broadcasting it will do," Dr. Chen reminded them grimly. Above them, they could hear the synchronized marching of ascendants, their footsteps creating a thunderous rhythm that shook dust from the ceiling. Dr. Patel studied the activation sequence they'd decoded. "The signal needs to be perfectly calibrated. Too weak, and it won't reach enough minds. Too strong. And we could burn out every human consciousness on Earth," Tanaka finished. Marcus burst into the room. "The Ascendants have changed formation. They're building something." On the monitors, they watched as thousands of Ascendants began arranging themselves in geometric patterns across the city. Their partially crystalline bodies were reflecting and amplifying the Founder's energy. "It's a ground-based reception array," Dr. Patel realized. "They're creating focal points for the harvest." Dr. Foster's equipment suddenly lit up with alerts. Neural activity in the Ascendants is spiking. The Founders are beginning the extraction process. Around the world, similar patterns were emerging. The Ascendants, now comprising nearly 40% of humanity, were becoming living conduits for the Founders' harvest technology. But something else was happening too. "Look at these readings," Dr. Chen called out. "The unaffected populations. Their brainwave patterns are synchronizing naturally. They're responding to the threat instinctively." Dr. Patel saw their chance. "That's our window. We can use the Founder's own harvest attempt as a carrier wave for our signal." The team rushed to modify their broadcast array, incorporating elements of the prison ship's crystalline technology they'd managed to analyze. The mysterious code fragment pulsed on their screens, seeming to respond to their efforts. "The signal needs to be personal," Dr. Patel explained as they worked. "Something that resonates with the core of human consciousness. Not just information, emotion, memory, the very essence of what makes us human." "How do we generate that kind of signal?" Marcus asked. Dr. Patel took a deep breath. "We don't generate it, we become it." She explained her plan. They would connect themselves directly to the broadcast array using their own consciousness as the initial seed of the signal. Their combined experiences, memories, and understanding of what they discovered would form the basis of the transmission. "The risk," Dr. Tanaka began, "is total consciousness death," she finished. "I know, but if we do nothing, that's what awaits everyone anyway." Dr. Foster looked at the neural interfaces they'd prepared. "How many minds do we need to reach?" "All of them," Patel replied. "Not just the resistors, the ascendants too. We need to break through the Founder's control and unite humanity's consciousness our way. Natural evolution, not forced conversion." The ground shook more violently. Above them, the sky had taken on a crystalline sheen as the Founder's ships moved into their final configuration. "The interfaces are ready," Dr. Chen announced. "But Maya, there's something else you need to know." He showed her the latest data from their analysis of the prison ships. "The signal. It will need an anchor point. Someone to stay conscious and guide it, to prevent it from dissolving into chaos." Dr. Patel understood immediately. "A sacrifice." She looked at her colleagues, brilliant minds who had worked tirelessly to save humanity. Her friends. Her eyes met each of theirs in turn, and she saw understanding dawn on their faces. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "Maya," Foster started to protest. "I found the pattern first. I understand it best. It has to be me." As they began connecting themselves to the broadcast array, as the crystalline ships above aligned for their harvest, as the ascendants marching reached a fever pitch, Dr. Maya Patel prepared herself for what was to come. She would have to remain conscious while channeling the combined mental energy of billions of human minds. She would have to guide humanity's consciousness through its evolution while resisting both the Founder's harvest and the raw power of unified human thought. And she would have to do it perfectly, or everything would be lost. Time seemed to slow as Dr. Patel lay back on the modified medical table, neural interfaces connecting her to the broadcast array. Around her, her colleagues were doing the same, each taking their position in what might be humanity's last coordinated act. "Broadcasting in 3 minutes," Marcus announced, monitoring the equipment. "Founder's harvest sequence at 70% charge." Through the neural link, Patel could already feel the edges of her colleague's consciousness, brushing against hers. Dr. Tanaka's precise mathematical mind, Dr. Foster's deep empathy and intuition, Dr. Chen's careful, methodical thoughts, each unique, yet beginning to harmonize. 2 minutes, Marcus called out. Ascendants are reaching peak synchronization. Above them, the crystalline ships had aligned into their final configuration. The sky itself seemed to be cracking, reality bending around the massive energy being channeled. The Founder's voice boomed through every speaker, every device, every human mind. Harvest sequence finalizing. Resistance is exponentially increasing extraction pain. But something else was happening. The mysterious code fragment they discovered had begun replicating itself across their systems, spreading through the neural network they created. The prison ships were resonating with their frequency. 1 minute, Marcus said, his voice tense. Dr. Patel, it's now or never. Maya closed her eyes and opened her mind. The neural interfaces hummed to life, and suddenly she wasn't just herself anymore. She was everyone in the room, their consciousness flowing into hers like tributaries into a river. But it wasn't enough. Signal too weak, she managed to say through gritted teeth. Need more. And then she felt it, a presence vast and ancient, reaching through the prison ships themselves. The entity that had imprisoned the Founders was touching her mind, offering it strength. Now, she screamed. Marcus threw the final switch. The world exploded into light and consciousness. Maya felt herself expanding, her mind connecting to millions, then billions of others. Every human on Earth, their thoughts and memories cascading through her like a tsunami. She was everyone and no one, everywhere and nowhere. The Ascendants fought back, their crystalline enhanced minds trying to resist the connection. The Founders poured more power into their harvest, trying to rip humanity's consciousness away before it could fully unite. Through it all, Maya held on, serving as the anchor point, the eye of the storm. She was a child in Mumbai, tasting rain for the first time. She was an old man in Buenos Aires, remembering his first love. She was a teenager in Lagos, dreaming of the stars. She was humanity. The Founder's harvest beam struck Earth like a spear of crystal lightning, but instead of finding billions of separate consciousness to harvest, they found one unified field. Not uniform, like their ascendants, but a harmony of billions of unique voices. Impossible, their voice thundered. This evolution was not permitted. Through the unified consciousness of humanity, Maya felt the truth crystallize. The Founders weren't gods. They were parasites feeding on the energy of evolving consciousness across the cosmos. Their prison ships weren't meant to contain them. They were meant to quarantine them. And humanity had just become the antibody. The unified human consciousness surged through the Founder's harvest beam, following it back to its source. Their crystalline ships began to crack, leaking light. The Ascendants scattered, their forced unity shattered by the natural harmony of human consciousness. Their crystalline transformations began to reverse, but the victory came at a terrible price. Maya felt herself beginning to dissolve, her individual consciousness stretched too thin across the vast network of human minds. She had become the lens through which humanity's power was focused, and that lens was cracking. "Hold on!" she heard Dr. Foster's voice, distant as a fading star. "We're trying to pull you back." But Maya knew she couldn't come back. Not completely. She had become something else. a bridge between what humanity was and what it was becoming. As the Founders' ships began to implode, as the sky cleared of their crystalline corruption, as billions of minds began to understand their new connection, Maya Patel made her choice. She let go, and humanity rose. The dawn that broke over Earth the next day illuminated a world forever changed. The crystalline ships had shattered, their fragments raining down like diamond dust that dissolved before touching the ground. But it wasn't the physical changes that marked humanity's transformation. It was the silence. The constant chatter of 8 billion separate minds had been replaced by something else. Not the enforced unity the Founders had tried to create, but a harmony of consciousness that allowed every human to remain uniquely themselves while being part of something greater. In the rebuilt command center beneath New York, Dr. Tanaka stood before a wall of monitors, watching the global aftermath unfold. Beside him, Dr. Foster and Dr. Chen worked to understand what humanity had become. "She's still here," Dr. Foster said quietly, monitoring the consciousness network that now connected all of humanity. Maya, or what she became, she's everywhere. They could all feel it. Dr. Maya Patel's consciousness had dispersed throughout the network, becoming part of the underlying structure that held humanity's unified mind together. She was no longer an individual, but she wasn't gone either. Through the new consciousness, they could see the true scope of what had happened. The Founders hadn't just been defeated, they had been transformed. Their crystalline essence had been broken down and reformed by humanity's unified power, becoming part of the very network they had tried to harvest. "Look at this," Dr. Chen called out, pointing to new data streaming across his screens. The prison ships. They weren't just containing the Founders, they were waiting for us to evolve. The ancient entity that had imprisoned the Founders revealed itself fully for the first time, not as a jailer but as a gardener. It had seeded countless worlds with life, waiting for a species to evolve the perfect balance between unity and individuality. Humanity had finally achieved what so many others had not: true cosmic consciousness without sacrificing individual identity. Around the world, people were discovering the extent of their new existence. A child in Kenya could share her dreams with a fisherman in Norway. An artist in Japan could blend his vision with a composer in Brazil. Knowledge, experience, and understanding flowed freely, yet each mind remained distinct, each person uniquely themselves. The ascendants, freed from their crystalline corruption, reintegrated into humanity. Their forced evolution had been painful, but it also prepared humanity's collective consciousness for what was to come. Through their new awareness, humanity could finally see the cosmos as it truly was, alive with consciousness at every level, from quantum fields to galactic clusters. The universe itself was one vast living network of evolved minds, and humanity had just taken its place among them. In what remained of the underground resistance bunker, Marcus found a final message from Dr. Patel, recorded just before the broadcast. "If you're seeing this, we succeeded. But success doesn't mean ending the story. It means beginning a new one. We're not just reaching for the stars anymore. We're becoming them. And I'll be there, in the space between thoughts, in the quantum dance of consciousness, in the very fabric of what we're becoming. Don't mourn me, join me. The universe is more beautiful than we ever imagined." As if in response to her words, the fragment of code that had helped them defeat the Founders began to evolve, revealing itself as a key to something even greater, a map of consciousness carved into the quantum fabric of reality itself. Humanity stood on the threshold of a new age, not as conquerors or victims, not as experiments or failures, but as conscious participants in the cosmic dance. They had faced the ultimate choice between extinction and evolution, and they had chosen a third path. transcendence. And somewhere in the vast network of unified consciousness, in the space between thoughts where individual minds touch the infinite, Dr. Maya Patel's laugh echoed like starlight, welcoming humanity home to a universe more vast and wondrous than anyone had dreamed. The founders had returned to reclaim humanity, but humanity had reclaimed itself, and the true evolution was just beginning.